Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's Small Business Essential webinar. Today, we're talking about building realistic goals, expectations, and action steps as first-time small business owners. My name is Sierra Ladroma. I'm the project manager for the Iowa Center's Women's Business Center. The Iowa Center's Women's Business Center is funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration. You will all receive an email after this event from my colleague, Ben Schultz, thanking you for attending today's session, information on how to connect to our speaker, as well as a form to complete. Please do us a big favor and take some time to fill this form out. This information allows us to continue providing free educational programming for small business owners in Iowa. Now go ahead and please take some time to look at the chat function on your Zoom screens so you can join the conversation by asking questions or adding comments. Today's featured guest is Dr. Ryan Anderson, founder of No Coast Consulting. No Coast Consulting was founded with the vision of empowering individuals to align their passion and vocation, achieve their professional aspirations, and attain fulfillment while maintaining a positive balance between work, life, and community involvement. Ryan, my friend, thank you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge. The screen is yours.
Awesome. Well, Sierra, thanks so much for the introduction. And just as a, kind of a cursory, background before I jump into the content of today's presentation, I just wanted to give kind of a quick background on why I started a business, because I think that's important for everyone to have an understanding of their why and the passion that needs to be congruent with that why. So first off, I'm just going to make a simple statement. If you're not familiar with Simon Sinek's Finding Your Why, I certainly hope you will become familiar with it. Just Google it. He's got a TED Talk. There's some books, plenty of information you can grab on the web. And how important it is to start with your why and not the how and the what's and et cetera. So that's kind of my first statement. The second thing is when I started this business, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it's been now, I was finding that a lot of people were unhappy day in and day out. They'd wake up, they'd go to work, and they wanted something more, whether it be altruistic, whether it be just, again, aligning their passion with their profession. They were just not happy, for a variety of reasons. And so one of the interesting things that I just thought, there's got to be a better way to help people. And so I started No Coast with the idea of again, helping people wherever their station in life was, whether it be starting a new business or changing careers in the private or public sector, either way. And so, again, it's been a great 6-7 years, but I wanted to impart a little bit of knowledge. I certainly don't have all the answers. I want to make that abundantly clear, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of my learning curve, if you will, because we all know there's learning curves when you start something new, especially with a new business. So let's just jump into it. Again, I think we've got the introduction's been very well said. If you do have questions, as Sierra mentioned, she'll be kind of monitoring the chat, and she can always relay questions to me as we go through this. So feel free to throw them up there, and I'll be happy to address them as they come up. So today we're going to cover, perception versus reality. That's the first thing I want to examine is the misnomers with being a small business owner. I think it's important also to understand traits you're going to need to get through the process of launching and maintaining your small business. There's some harsh realities. I'm going to be candid. So, please bear with me as I tell you some of the stuff today, because this is not meant to be hurtful or, negative. It's meant to give you a realistic perspective on what to expect the first, several weeks, several months, maybe even a year or two. And again, managing risk is going to be a big part of something you're going to be doing. If you launch your own business, or if you have, you already know that. So we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. And then I'll end the presentation by discussing some success tips, ways to help you get through the choppy waters of launching a business. Excuse me. So let's jump in. Perception versus reality. All right. When I started my business, I thought, man, I'm gonna be working less hours because I'll have more time because I'm my own boss. And I hear that all the time from folks. Well, I'm gonna be my own boss so I can dictate my schedule. And that is not entirely true. You will have more flexibility on when you work, but that does not mean that you will work less hours. In fact, to be blunt, you're going to work more hours. On average, research shows that small business owners in their first year are working anywhere from 65 up to 75, 80 hours a week. And that's a lot of time. You may be working a full-time job already right now somewhere else, and you might be thinking, man, I'm working 50 hours a week, and that seems like a lot. It is a lot. And for that first several months, there's going to be a lot of time you're going to have to put into launching that business. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. You think, hey, am I my own boss? I'm going to have time to spend more with friends and family. The reality of it is you're going to have some very frank, open, candid dialogue with your better half, if you have one, and your friends and family in general. You're going to have to explain to them that this is going to be an all time consuming, you're all in. If you really want to make this thing happen, you're going to have to be all in. You can't just kind of put one toe in the water and think it's going to launch itself, which means there's going to be sacrifice. And unfortunately, one of those sacrifices is going to be the amount of time you spend, frankly, with your friends and family. And so I had to have a very candid conversation with my lovely wife, and said, hey, we have young kids. This is going to be a challenge. Can we make this happen? And she was amazing. She was accommodating, but it made me take a step back. Having that conversation made me really reflect. Do I want to do this? Is it worth it? And so I want you to be having those tough conversations with your support system, whoever that may be. Everyone thinks, hey, I've got this great idea. I'm just going to scale up right away. Absolutely not. It's going to take months, frankly, to turn a profit. Now, some sectors turn profits faster than others. Some sectors scale up faster than others. And I'll talk about that here in a little bit. Again, the last thing I want to say is entrepreneurs are not just motivated by money. You all probably understand this at this point. You got to be motivated by passion, because if money is the only thing driving you through these choppy waters, so to speak, you're probably going to lose some of that motivation or grit if money is the only thing pushing you along. You got to really be in and just really, really committed to whatever service, product, et cetera, that you are launching. Okay. Another thing that I hear a lot, well, are entrepreneurs born? Absolutely not. You can make yourself into an entrepreneur. You can learn the rules of the road. You can be self-taught. We live in a wonderful day and age, and Sierra and the folks at the Iowa Center, they have these great experts and tools that you should be plugging into. Make sure that you're taking advantage of that. You do not have to have a college degree or a 4-year degree or to become an entrepreneur. There's a lot of just knowledge free on the web and other local sources. I get asked a lot about fundraising, and I'm sure there might be some questions about funding down the road. So the first thing I'll say on funding is that you don't have to go to a venture capitalist to launch. Okay. You can start where most people do, and that is frankly what I call friend raising. Going to your support system, friends, family, and saying, "Hey, could you chip in 100 here, a few hundred there?" Micro amounts, okay? These micro amounts will actually add up fairly fast, more than you might realize, enough to get you at least launched, if that makes sense. The other thing is, please consider SBA loans. SBA loans are a good way, especially for women-owned and minority-owned business leaders. There is a ton, and I mean a ton, of opportunities out there for funding, specifically in the SBA, Small Business Administration. Excuse me, I shouldn't use jargon. The Small Business Administration, space. So again, I just would encourage you to keep your eyes on a grant and funding opportunities through the SBA. Again, you don't have to start when you're young. I'm friends and know very well folks in their 50s and 60s that have launched and have done really, really well. Like one started a brewery, one started a distillery, one started a restaurant, done very well for themselves, quote unquote, later in life, whatever that means. If the pandemic has taught us anything, there's never too late of a time to reinvent yourself. And that's a really important thing to know. Anyway, anyone can, start a business, sure. But the hard part is sustaining it. The easy part is launch. The hard part is sustaining it. I cannot stress that enough. And by the way, launching is not easy. So I'm not trying to lose sight of those beginning months. I want to segue into the traits for successful entrepreneurs. Clearly, you got to have passion. You got to have a lot of energy and initiative. And there will be peaks and valleys in that energy and that initiative, but you're going to have the grit and the determination to push through it. And that's why it's so important to not only be motivated by money, but by the thing that you're created or have created. Okay. There's going to be a lot of ambiguity, okay? A lot of anxiety over unknowns. You're going to have a lot of unknowns. That is okay. But again, you kind of have to get more comfortable with the unknowns, because that's going to be part of the learning process. Man, hindsight's always 2020, but that first year I learned so much because I failed, and that's not a bad thing. Every failure is an opportunity. I don't know if you've read Leslie Odom's book Failing Up. It's not been out too long, but it's a good quick read about, hey, sometimes when we trip, it's actually a really good opportunity to pull ourselves off and do better and launch from what is a perceived failure. You got to have self-confidence. If you don't believe in yourself, no one's going to believe in you. Okay, if you don't believe in yourself, no one will take you seriously. And that means the banker, that means your support system, your friends, your family, the people that are invested in you. You got to be confident in what you're doing. You do have to have some good self-discipline. That's one of the traits, the success tips I'll talk about here in a little bit. How to maintain that discipline even through those peaks and the valleys, I should say, when you kind of run out of steam. And then having a high emotional IQ, understanding how to relate to people at different stations in life. You know, the banker wants something different than the customer in some ways, and yet they're interrelated, right? So you got to kind of tease out the nuances of what each third party that you're working with, what they need. And there's a lot of third parties you're probably going to have to work with candidly to launch. Okay. All right. So let's jump into the realities of running your own business. You're not going to make money right away. The funding you're going to need to get needs to account for your salary. You need to pay yourself, because you got to keep food on your plate. You got to keep a roof over your head while you're launching this thing. So understand that some of the funding that you may need to get preloaded, so to speak. And in your budgeting, you need to build in, again, a reasonable salary and reasonable expectations on revenue. Your personal life for a while may suffer. Mine certainly did. I had to cut back on some stuff for the first year. You know, I do a lot in the community, but I didn't do as much that first year. I just couldn't. I didn't have the bandwidth. Nothing is going to go completely how you perceive it. There will be, again, these things that you trip over, these obstacles, and it really it behooves you to pick yourself up, hopefully as you can, as fast as you can, and fail fast, so to speak. You know, and look at that as that opportunity. Money and success do lie on two different axes sometimes. I want you to recalibrate how your expectations for money and your expectations for revenue generation, because that's one of the hardest parts. I came in thinking, man, I'm going to be cracking money, you know, within 6 months, I'll be good to go. I'll quit my full-time job. Life will be good. Absolutely not. And we'll come back to that in a second. And again, some amount of success or failure is going to happen. This is one of the more important slides. I feel like I want to be very, very, very open and transparent on timing for profitability. And the big caveat I want to put on there is this depends on the sector. Okay. So Entrepreneur, the magazine, estimates that businesses making a new product take at least 3 years to become profitable. Okay. Now that's a new product. So that's at the far end of the risk spectrum. Let me say that again. This is 3 to 4 years is at the far end of the spectrum. But if you're a service-based business, you might be able to hit profitability in several months, as in like 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. Luckily, I didn't have an inventory. I'm a service-based business. Does that make sense? So my overhead and my initial capital was fairly low. I needed a website. I needed, some marketing. I needed a few digital things, and I needed a place to work. So I went to a co-working space for that first year or two. And those things were really my initial investment, right? Not a lot. It was, an insurance, some other stuff. And of course I had to incorporate. I had to make sure I was a legitimate business. I had to register with the Secretary of State. But again, those are all pretty reasonable, low few $100 investments, if that makes any sense. But if you're a restaurant or in another sector, you may need, honestly, for capital, you may need a couple $100,000. You may need quite a bit, frankly, to get you through that first year or two, because you're going to have to buy a lot of inventory. You're going to have to buy a lot of stuff that is perishable, especially if you're in the service industry. Food goes bad, right? Well, what if you don't sell enough of it and it goes bad? These are the things that you're going to have to think about. And then the last thing I'll just say is that, and sometimes it's hard to hear this, but 2/3 of businesses with employees survive about 2 years and only half survive 5 years. Again, the survival rate goes up exponentially after year 3 or 4. If you make it the first couple 3 years, you're probably going to be okay. But again, the more capital you need, the harder it is, the bigger the obstacles are to getting to profitability. So just some quick notes on managing your expectations on timeliness. It's going to take several months. It may take a couple years, again, depending on if it's a service-based business or if you actually have products, et cetera, that you're selling. So again, managing risk. Please be realistic about timelines and revenues. You got to manage your own internal expectations. There's a really hard duality here that I don't think a lot of folks realize before they launch, and that's you're going to be managing both the business itself and you're working in the business and on the business at the same time, I guess is a good way to capture it. You have to actually manage the products, the service. You have to do all those things. And then you also have to do some of the behind the scenes stuff. Is my social media up to date? Is my website look good? How's my search engine optimization? Stuff that I didn't know anything about 6 years ago, I've learned a lot about because you kind of have to wear a lot of hats when you run your own business. The best thing I ever did for myself was create a business map. And this literally lists everything soup to nuts that you need to do. So, you need a bookkeeper. You're going to have invoicing, right? You're going to have, if you have inventory, you got to have an inventory management system. You might have some legal stuff just to make sure you're codified with the state, make sure you're good to go with the IRS, right? You don't want to get your hands slapped by the tax folks. Making sure that marketing and HR, these are all functional areas that you're going to need probably some help with at some point. And so you got to decide, what can you do? So when you do this map, you lay out all those functional areas that I just listed. And then you got to figure out, what can I do myself and what do I need to outsource? What can I do on my own? And that's the working on the business part versus working in the business, if that makes sense. And then you delegate out what items you are not in your bailiwick. I cannot stress this enough. If there's anything you listen to me today or hear from me today, please take this with you. This right here, what I'm about to say. Invest in what you're good at. Don't invest in your weaknesses, okay? Invest in your strengths, not in your weaknesses. What I mean by that is, I'm not a marketing expert, okay? I don't have a background in marketing. So guess what? I turned over my marketing to a marketing small business to do all my SEO, to do my Facebook, my LinkedIn, because I didn't want to invest hours and hours and hours to become an expert. Does that make sense? That was not going to be time efficient for me. And so you got to learn where your skill sets are and where they're not, and then try to outsource the things that you don't have the time or energy to invest in. The last thing I'll quickly say is scenario planning. When you do your budget, your initial budget, and your financials, your cash flow analysis, your income statement, and your balance sheet, when you do those items, you should do it in a scenario-based approach, which means you've got a base case scenario, which is what you're expecting to have happen, then a worst case scenario, and then your best case scenario. Now, we all know COVID has shot the heck out of a lot of expectations, right? Last year and change have been very challenging because it's hard to predict what is the end of 2021, maybe even the beginning of 2022 looks like. But again, scenario planning will help account for that variability. So that's a very important part of budgeting. So I want to spend the last few minutes today, before I open up to questions, I want to talk about a few success tips that I've learned from the School of Hard Knocks, ways to I think, hopefully improve your viability and your profitability earlier. So first things first, set boundaries. My goodness. When you work from home, like most of us are right now, it's really hard. You're going to need to set clear boundaries on hours and location, even in your house or your apartment or whatever, on where you're working. For example, I have a desk. I work at my desk. I don't work in my bedroom, because that is my Zen moment, my Zen space, for lack of a better term. Like that's where I read, and so I want there to be a physical separation between work and home, even though it's kind of weird because it's all part of my home, if that makes any sense. But it's really important to do that for yourself. Now, I will say, in a previous life prior to COVID, I was working at like Gravitate. I worked in co-working spaces. That's very helpful because what it does is it just changes it up. And psychologically, research has shown that's very important. So as hopefully more people get vaccinated, hopefully things continue to get safer. Hopefully you can get back out there and have more of a formal separation between work and home. Find a hobby or eight. You're going to need something to recharge your battery, so to speak. And I don't care if that's volunteering, like I like to do, or reading a book, or binging on Amazon Prime or whatever, Netflix, or exercise. Take your health seriously. Find something that makes you happy. Because your business can make you happy, but it's also going to be very frustrating. And so you need to have some time where you're just like, hey, I just want to relax. And you're going to schedule that in. I know that sounds weird, but you absolutely need to schedule in, because if you don't, it's not going to happen. I cannot tell you how many times I wish my first year I would have just said, nope, I'm not working. It's Saturday. I'm not going to work. I am literally just going to go outside. I'm going to hang out with my kids, or I'm going to go read a book, or I'm going to go and, whatever, go hang out with friends. Let's see. Oh, this is a really important one, sleep. I mean, it sounds obvious, right? But you would be shocked about how many small business owners do not get enough sleep. Research shows on average, the first year, people are only getting 4 to 5 hours of sleep when they launch a business. You can't survive, let alone thrive, on 4 hours of sleep a night. It's not sustainable. You need as close to 8 as possible. So you have to know yourself, and we all have cycles where we're more productive. Does that make sense? For me, I'm most productive at night. But not late, but like after my kids go to bed, 8 to 10, I can just jet, right? I'm not a morning person by any stretch. So that means when I wake up, like that's not my productive time. So I balance my schedule and my sleep cycle, knowing those things about myself. That's very important. And this actually is a good segue into my next slide. Making a daily routine. You need to have time blocks. I start every night before I go to bed. I have a little, like, almost like a journal. It's a business notebook by my bed, and I write, here are the few things I know I need to accomplish tomorrow. Okay. I don't necessarily prioritize them, but I at least write them down. And then when I get up the next day, I will work to prioritize them. Now, understandably, you're going to wake up and your day is going to go sideways, right? That priority may change, and that's okay. But you got to start from a good space, if that makes sense. And that will help, especially for you taskless folks. I don't know if you're like me, but I'm kind of a taskless person. I like the sense of fulfillment as I check off those to-do items. And this is so important. Oh my gosh, email. There have been so many studies about how much email just sucks our humanity, sucks our soul, and controls us, because we spend so much time in it. So do yourselves a favor. Pick maybe 2 times a day on a weekday or whenever to check it. A lot of us have it on our phone, and the problem is then when we get pinged every time, we go right there like, oh, I got to reply right now. No, maybe, like for me, I like to check it once in the morning, and then I'll wait until towards the end of the day to check it. And to be honest, if anything's super important between that time, it can still wait. It's not like I'm taking days and not logging in, but make sure you time block so you're consistent with when you check those email accounts. And then for me in the afternoon, I am not productive in the afternoon. I know myself well enough to know that, like, I get that after lunch, crash, if you will. And so I like to take time to either, frankly, meditate, nap, do something that is, not focused on your business. But that's, again, works for me. And then again, make sure you schedule lunch and breaks every couple hours. You got to do that. You got to physically get up and walk around just to give your brain a break. But these routines, these time blocks have helped me tremendously. Otherwise, I'd be sitting at my desk chained to it for hours. And then, all of a sudden I wake up and it's like, it's been 5 or 6 hours. And I'm like, this is not good for my health, for my wellness. And then the next one is, and I cannot stress this enough, create a support system if you don't already have one. Having someone to talk to is cathartic. It will help you. Just having someone you can trust to vent. And so I've seen this done both ways. I think it's important to have both a personal and a professional board of directors, if you will. And what I mean by that is a group of people that you can totally trust. So for an example, I created kind of an unofficial board of directors for No Coast, my business. And basically I've got an HR person on there. I've got an accountant on there. And so these are our unofficial people I can run an idea by and say, hey, I'm not a CPA. You are. Does this make any sense? and they can at least get me on the right path. Okay. Or they can connect me with a professional if I need to pay a professional to come in and help me on something. But again, having that board of directors for your business, wildly successful, very helpful, and keeping you on task. Well, and this ties back to sleep, but this also has to do with hydration. I know, again, sounds so obvious, but you absolutely need to get 10 cups of water a day. That sounds like a lot, and it is, but I actually keep, in fact, I'll show it to you. I've got a bottle of Essentia that I keep by me a lot when I'm working, because otherwise I forget, and then I'm consistently dehydrated. Research shows that the more you hydrate, frankly, the better your productivity is. The more on cue you are. And the last thing is I call it glorifying the hustle culture. I used to be of the mindset, and I was horrible at this, that the more I work, the better I'm going to be. And that is absolutely not true. There's a law of diminishing returns. At some point, you're just killing your productivity, and you're killing your happiness, and your contentedness too as well, being content. So I just want to say, hey, understandable, the first year you're going to launch, you're going to work some hours, for sure, a lot of hours, but you got to put a cap on it, and you got to be diligent in maintaining that cap, because it's easy. The concept is mission creep, right? I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but mission creep, meaning it's easy to let little things kind of creep up, and then all of a sudden you said, I'm only going to work 50 hours this week, and then all of a sudden you're at 68 hours, right? So you got to be diligent and disciplined in saying, no, is this really urgent? Is this really essential? If not, then no, I'm already over my hours. It is what it is. And again, it's hard to do, right? It'll take some time for you to get there, but it will help you in the long run. We're winding down here. It looks like focus on the why and not the how. So when you ask how, and I don't know if you felt this, I have, the anxiety can go through your system, because when you come up with the question, how am I going to get all this done? It's daunting, right? I mean, just, oh my gosh, how am I going to get all this done? So instead of framing like that, I say, ask what needs to happen next. So get your brain trained to go into solution mode. And that goes back to that list and prioritizing that task list I mentioned. Because generally on the tactical side, your brain you actually have to train your brain to flip a bit. And this is part of the reason why email and other distractions like social media can be so damaging to our success and our productivity, because it's called, like, it's brain switching, code switching in your brain, where let me explain it this way. Human beings in general think we're great at multitasking. Time after time, it's been proven we are terrible at multitasking. So please don't think, even if you think you're good, you're probably not near as good at multitasking as you probably think you are. So that being said, you need to cut out those distractions. You can't do 4 things at the same time and do them well. All right. And one of my favorite business sayings is, if you try to be all things to all people, you end up being no one to nobody. And so you need to cut out the distractions as much as possible. And then also, and part of that cutting out is outsourcing, right? Know what you're good at, focus on it, and then cut out the ancillary stuff and give it to somebody else to let them execute on. I think this is my last tip here. This has to do with communication and tech tools. You need a good customer management system. I use HubSpot. I've also used QuickBase. Those are just 2 examples, but they'll help you stay organized. You load all your customer contact information in there. It can help you with your sales funnel. Manage that as well. Some communication tools that I'm a pretty big fan of is Slack. I don't know if you're all familiar with Slack, but it's basically just a quick messaging tool, but it's nice because it keeps it all in one area, keeps it saved. You can archive stuff. Or WhatsApp, essentially works the same. Trello is more of a project management type, tech tool. Again, there's tools out there, but here's the big caveat. Okay, these are all great tools, but the big caveat is time block when you do these things. Does that make sense? Have a specific time in your daily schedule when you go into HubSpot and work on it, or when you go to Slack and type in messages to your team. Okay, they can be very helpful, but there can be a tendency to jump into them and use them 24/7, right? Oh, I'm on my phone. I'm just going to go to my Slack app and message my coworker. You know what I mean? Or my marketing person, whatever. Do yourself a favor, and again, time block. So you only do those things a certain time each day. So I know I just threw kind of a lot at you, and I just want to say, please follow up with me on LinkedIn or No Coast Consulting. I've got a website, or my email is nocoastconsulting@gmail.com, or my Grandview address, where I'm also a professor. So again, thank you for your time. I'm going to let Sierra kick it off with questions if there are some.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I love the success tips at the end. I think that's always key, to be able to step away from something with action steps. So there are a lot of questions that came through, and I'm going to jump into them. So awesome. When starting, how did you measure your success in a non-financial way? Since you obviously don't make money off the bat, how did you keep yourself going and hold yourself accountable in ways other than money?
Great question. Yeah, so I set I call it micro goals or sub goals, right? And I did that on a quarterly basis. Well, let me back up, a monthly and a quarterly basis. Okay. So the first thing, and I didn't do this right away. I wish I would have, but a few months in, I went to a class actually and went through some training, and it really got me calibrated that I needed to have stuff done on a monthly and a quarterly basis. Okay. And so I did have some monetary goals. I want to make this clear. That doesn't mean it was profitability in month one or profitability in quarter one, but maybe it was, I want to make, and I'm just using this number up. I want to make $500 in revenue my first month. Again, I'm just totally making that number up. It's ad hoc, but the point is, have something quantifiable that you can benchmark yourself against. So it's okay to have monetary goals that don't necessarily always revolve around quote unquote profitability. And what they should do is they should cascade. They should cascade up. So maybe your goal is, I want to be profitable by year one. Well, then you back into those monthly goals. To be profitable by year one, I need to make, again, I'm making this number up, $2,000 a month in revenue. So that's your monthly goal. Does that make sense? Those things kept me motivated because I kind of had something tangible. I'm a finance guy by trade. And so I wanted something tangible that I could like look towards and say, I didn't hit it, or maybe I did. And if I didn't hit it, I wanted to know why. But those intermediate goals helped me stay motivated even during bad times.
Excellent. Next question is, as a small business owner, we often hear you are your business. How do you handle that duality as you are talking to friends or meeting new people, or just enjoying those 8 or more hobbies that you have, and then just going from just regular casual talking to sharing about your business?
Yeah. Boy, that's also a great question. So, there's a fine line. You don't want to come off like a used car salesman with your friends and family, right? And only talk about your business. There's more. Here's the thing. People say you are your business, and yes, that's true to an extent, but you also are a human being in and above and outside of your business, okay? You have your personal life, you have your personal preferences, et cetera, right? And so I'm going to encourage you, especially when you get started, to be a little bit, I don't want to say you want to be conservative in talking about your business, but you want to be very selective about how much. That's a good way to put it. How much you want to talk about your business. You want people to know about it, and it's fine to reshare stuff. Like, for example, if you're friends with me on, Sierra and I are friends on, social media, I may occasionally reshare something from No Coast, but it's a very small minority. So if you go through my personal page, very seldom will you see a No Coast thing reposted. On occasion, I will. So I think that's a good way to tell folks you've got this business, but you don't want to be excessive. So it's a fine line. It's a crux, right? You don't want everything to be about your business, because then people will think you're just trying to make sales and that you don't care about them as a human being. You're just out to make a profit from them and from your relationship. So you got to be really careful about that. And the last thing I'll say is, especially in this current day and age politically, you need a bit of a separation, I think, between your business page on social media and your personal page. This is just my opinion. On your personal page, it is what it is, right? But you better make sure you're careful on who you let see that personal page. On the business page, I would be very selective about what kind of political things I put out there, about what kind of things I put out there that could be quote unquote controversial, because we live in a day and age where you want to be authentic, but you also, when you get started, you also don't know who you could be offending inadvertently sometimes. So again, separation of church and state will help with that a little bit. Keep your personal, keep your business more business focused.
Great, thank you. So for functional areas you don't have expertise in, How did you decide between outsourcing that task or trying to learn how to do it yourself?
That's a good question. That was one of the hardest parts of my learning curve. Actually, I would say, let's take marketing for an example. Okay, I tried to do my own thing on the marketing front, and it was, I would look at the analytics from Facebook or Google Analytics, and it was kind of hit or miss. And so after a year, I mean, actually a couple of years of doing it on my own, I'm like, I knew I was missing a lot. And so I just finally said, I'm going to pay someone that knows what the heck they're doing, going to bring them in, and it's been wonderful. It's been money well spent. So that's just one example. I would say 8 out of 10 times, have somebody else do it if you can afford it. Does that make sense? Now, there's certain things that you can do to save money. For example, like bookkeeping. Okay, no one likes bookkeeping. I don't like bookkeeping, but with QuickBooks or other options out there, you can do it pretty easily and not have to pay somebody a few $100 a month to maintain your books and your invoicing. So that would be an example of something you could do to save yourself a little bit of money that probably isn't that hard to do. You know what I mean? But marketing, if you're a creative person, do the marketing yourself. If you struggle in that creative space, outsource it. Pay somebody that knows about SEO. So.
And there are a lot of those resources.
Yes.
Okay, another question that I personally have, I know that you and I have a long history of networking in different organizations that we've been involved in. And I know you prioritize community involvement and growing your relationships through networks. The biggest question that I often get is, how do you even start? How do you network? What's the first step? And how do you find communities?
Boy, that's a great question. It's a little bit of guess and check, trial by fire, if you will, meaning testing the waters. Now, and here's the interesting thing. With COVID, in some ways, this has actually made it really easier. And I know that sounds paradoxical. Let me explain. Let's say you're a young professional. We'll just bring that up as an example. You fit into that young professional space. You can attend virtual events and kind of get a flavor and a feel for what the culture of that group is like, without having to invest time to get in your car and drive to a bar or a brewery or wherever they're hosting that young professional event. The other thing I tell people to think of your extracurricular activities in 3 buckets. One is personal. What do you prefer to do? Meaning network and hobby-based businesses. So, for example, if you like gardening, go find a gardening club, and then you can network in a very casual, indirect way there, right? Or if you're a voracious reader like I am, find a book club, right? And you can actually network ironically through your hobbies. Number 2, or the second one would be professionally based silos. So meaning like if you are starting a marketing small business, go to LinkedIn and join Marketing Professionals of Iowa or Marketing Professionals of Des Moines, right? So you can network with like-minded people in your profession. That's the second bucket. And the third one is more really, I would say more on the technical front, like going to places like meetup.com or other online like services where you can find like-minded people. That can be a great way to get started, or LinkedIn. I will tell you, I've used LinkedIn more in the last year to find like-minded people than I ever thought I would have, to be honest. LinkedIn has been a godsend to me in the last year for networking, because of COVID.
Mm-hmm. I know that's something you and I have in common is just saying hello to someone, whatever platform that is. Des Moines is a great place for that. And honestly, I would say anywhere. If you want to connect with someone, just say hello. This is who I am. I love what you do. Would love to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite stories, just real quick, is Sukri Radia, who used to run Bankers Trust. Phenomenal leader, philanthropic leader, great man. He was known, literally, if you were to reach out to this guy, he would find a way to make time. Now, sometimes you'd meet with this guy at 5:30 a.m. because that was literally the only time in his day. But this guy would go out of his way. Just because you message him, I don't care if you're an intern, I don't care what your age or your station in life is, he was going to take time to meet with you. That is symbolic of Des Moines culture. One of the reasons I've stayed in Des Moines and I love Des Moines is because people are accessible here, regardless if they're a CEO, a VP, or whatever. So, don't be afraid to ask for a meeting, virtual or otherwise, whatever your comfort level is.
Excellent, I agree. So another question is, did you compose a formal business plan at some point in your process? Mm-hmm. If you did it again, would you do one before starting?
Yes and yes. Great question. I actually write business plans. That's part of what No Coast does. I should have done one before I launched. I did not. I had this great idea. I went to LegalZoom. I typed in, I'm like, I need an EIN. I need a tax identification number, and all of a sudden I had one. I was like, whoa, now I probably should get insurance. I should have had a business plan to launch. I did not. So now that's why I write one, and I did write one eventually for myself. But I think it would have quickened my learning curve if I would have just been a little more patient with myself and with the business, and taken a month or two or whatever. Frankly, it takes a while to write a business plan. These are not 5-page documents. I've written 60, 70 pagers. They're not all that long, but yeah, it would, because it keeps you on track, and it's a good source to go back to see how you're doing, and look back and say, hey, a year ago, I thought I was going to be doing all these things. The reality of it is a year later is not congruent with that. Why is that? And then kind of reflect back. So,
yeah. So let's talk about money real quick.
Let's do it.
What advice do you have for entrepreneurs to pay themselves?
To do what? Sorry.
To pay themselves.
Yeah. So that's a good question. You need to know what you're worth. Okay. And I know that was one of the other challenges I had, is like, how do I price my labor? How do I price my labor? So what I did is I actually worked with, I have some friends that used to work up at UNI, in their small business office. And I did some research collectively with them, and we came up with the ballpark hourly wage of what my small business was going to do. Writing resumes, writing small business plans, blah, 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 all that stuff. And so it turned out, and this is several years ago, the average was like, I think 40 or $50 an hour, if I recall correctly. So I used that as my starting point for budgeting. So I said, if I work X amount of hours at this rate, this will get me Y, right? And that was where I started. You want to do research on your competition and do your best to try to find out what the market wage is. Now, if you don't know what the market wage is, there's some generic places you can go, like Glassdoor.com or even Indeed.com, and they will give you salary wages. Again, these are generally private sector salary averages, but at least it gives you something to target. So
another money question I have is, what advice do you have in approaching friends and family to have the conversation about fund assistance?
Absolutely. So that's a good example. I had a friend, I invested in a business, 4 years ago, I want to say. My friend was starting a business. She's up in Minneapolis. And she ran a crowdfunding, or what's the term, GoFundMe account type deal. And they only needed, this is a service-based business. They were creating curriculum for girls, for teenage girls, for leadership development. And so they only needed, I think, 5 or 10,000, not a lot in the small business world, right? So they said, hey, we really need some funding. If you gave us a few grand, we would make you a small minority holder. There are creative ways you can bring in money with your friends and family that give them a skin in the game, but you got to be very careful about that. I don't want to get too far in the weeds on this topic, but I just want to touch very briefly on it. When you start friend raising or family raising, some may bring up equity, like as becoming a stakeholder. You have to be very careful about that, because you still need control over your business, right? And so, I was a very minority stakeholder in this business, and I was perfectly fine with that. I didn't want any day in and day out thing to do with it. I liked the idea. I was supportive of it. I trusted her. I gave her money. I said, let's do quarterly check-ins, right? That was, sometimes monthly, but either way, I was very hands-off. So it really depends on the expectation of the person you're asking. A lot of people are happy to support you as a friend or a family, but there might be some expectations and some stipulations. And so you got to be really careful with how much you give away without knowing how much you're going to make, because they're betting on a unknown, but you're that unknown. Does that make sense? And so you got to make sure if they ask for a lot, that you push back and hire a good business attorney. That is one of the best things you can do for yourself. When it comes to this stuff, okay, get good legal counsel. You want to protect your business, because it can get very unwieldy if you don't.
Excellent, thank you. So my last question for you is on personal and professional development. So you mentioned before Simon Sinek and Leslie Odom. I know that you love reading. I know you are just love learning. What are some other sources that you would recommend for entrepreneurs?
Yeah,
whether it's books or videos or anything like that.
Yeah, great one I just read called The Power of Habits by Charles Duhigg, I want to say. Man, that I wish I would have had that book available to me 6 years ago, because it talks about how you get habits ingrained and the feedback cycle and the loop that happens with getting habits formed. And by the way, you need to have very formed habits to be a good small business owner, entrepreneur, because you're going to have to be diligent. And so that was a book I really enjoyed. Honestly, I read a couple business magazines just to help me keep in touch with general business trends. I read Bloomberg. Bloomberg for me is just kind of one of my sources. And I also read Fortune magazine once a month. But those tend to be where I just get sort of up-to-date information. So.
Excellent. We have one more question that came in reference to pay yourself first. What if that draws too much money out of your company during launch? Isn't it best to keep the money in the business?
Yeah, but it's not, they're not mutually exclusive. Okay. That's a really good question. And let me clarify. There's not always a mutual exclusivity between those two things. And here's why. Because if you can't keep food on your plate, if you can't keep a roof over your head, you're not going to be able to run a business, right? You got to have those. It's Maslow to a degree, and not to oversimplify it, but it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you aren't taking care of yourself fundamentally as a human being, you can't have a successful business, right? And so you have to pay yourself enough, whatever that means. That may mean you have to, by the way, change your lifestyle. I will tell you, I did not do any. I love to travel. Okay, I did not travel at all that first year, or very little, because I didn't have any extra funds. It was going into the business. But yeah, I did pay myself first. And if I didn't, because really it's all kind of coming from the same, in certain ways, it's kind of all coming from the same bucket, so to speak, in some ways, if you're your own business owner, right? So you got to pay yourself enough to sustain yourself.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we are gonna say goodbye. What is one final piece of advice that you have for those tuning in now and in the future?
Okay, great. Boy, that's a good one, and it's tough. I will say, this sounds a little meta, but be thinking about the kind of business you want to run. I don't mean like from a product or services. I mean the culture of your business. From the beginning, be thinking strategically about what kind of culture do you want to build, right? And I know that that's probably the last thing on most of your minds. If you're just thinking, how do I keep the lights on? How do I keep everything up to date? How am I supposed to even think about culture? But you know what? Every step that you make at the beginning has a ripple effect to your future business success or lack thereof. And one of my favorite sayings is culture eats strategy for lunch. I'll say it again, culture eats strategy for lunch. And I think you'll find that to be true. So setting yourself up to have a healthy culture down the road will pay massive dividends 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So
culture strategy for lunch.
Yep.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today. Endlessly appreciate you. I hope that we can see each other in person soon. But until then, stay healthy. Reach out to the Iowa Center if you ever need anything. But thank you so much for your expertise. And Absolutely. Then everyone, thank you for joining. Thank you for being with us today, asking questions and being part of the conversation. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.